Hola, I'm Alejandro, and today I'm excited to bring you an exclusive interview with Paul from Spanish with Qroo Paul, one of the biggest and best channels on YouTube to learn Spanish. In our conversation, he shares his best advice for people to get started learning Spanish. He also talks about his favorite textbook to master Spanish grammar. And at the end of our conversation, we dive into the biggest challenges English speakers face when learning the language. I hope you enjoy it. Hola, Paul. ¿Cómo estás?
Hola, bien, bien, ¿cómo estás?
Well, yeah. So, for the very few people that will not know who you are, can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
I don't know about the very few people, that's very kind. I'm Paul. People call me Qroo Paul on YouTube. I run a couple YouTube channels. One of them is Spanish with Qroo Paul, and the other one is Qroo Paul and Linda. So,
Uh-huh. Okay. So, what is the second channel about? The Spanish with Qroo Paul is quite intuitive by the title, and we will talk more about that. But what about your other channel?
so the other one, Qroo Paul and Linda, I had moved to Mexico in 2015 when I retired from the police force, and we started our life there in a new country, and so I became a blogger and started writing about our experiences, and then picked up about 60,000 readers and got picked up on some different newspapers around Mexico that cater to English speakers. And then around COVID, I switched over to YouTube to see if that would work. So it's worked out pretty well.
Okay, impressive. So one of the things I'm impressed about you is your Spanish. Your Spanish is fantastic. We are doing this in English because, well, most of my audience are beginners. But why were you so successful in learning Spanish? Because, as you know, many people try, and it's a difficult thing to do as an adult. So, what makes you such a successful student?
It is really difficult. I often equate learning a language as an adult to like joining the gym after New Year's for your resolution. You go
Mhm.
in with a lot of enthusiasm and you're putting in a lot of work, but you're not seeing the results. So a lot of people quit. It's not easy. For me, I wasn't very good at Spanish. I was terrible at it in school. I barely passed. I was terrible. My Spanish teacher told me, and I still remember, I won't mention her name now in case she's still living. She told me that some people do not have an aptitude for a foreign language and said that I'm probably one of those people.
Mm.
So I was believing that. I graduate from high school, go to the police force, and I get hired. And I get assigned to an area in Florida that has a large migrant farm population, most of whom come from Mexico and Central America, and no one speaks English except for the children who go to school. And so you're getting called to domestic violence calls, or somebody stole something from them, or they're having a dispute with a neighbor, or whatever it is, and I can't talk to anybody. So I kept thinking, oh, my teacher said I have no aptitude for the language, and it wasn't easy for me. But I said, I have this incentive now. I have to at least try. So my goal at first was to just learn enough to just be able to get some information from somebody. What's their name? I had really low expectations.
Mm.
I went and bought some Spanish books, and tried to start studying on my own. And it was slow at first, but at least I had the advantage of being able to practice things with native speakers,
Right. Hmm.
because I would read something and then I'd go out and say it. And if it was wrong, they would just go, which I knew it
And
was
you get
wrong.
immediate feedback. Right. Okay.
No idea
That's
what I was saying. So I still had that incentive. And then once I started to learn a little, I started to have some confidence, because once I spoke some, people were so nice about nicely correcting me and kind of guiding
uh-huh.
my Spanish. And also, I became a much more effective police officer, because once I could speak some, people would come up and they'd ask me
Mm.
in Spanish, "Can you speak Spanish?" And I'd say, "Yes."
Uh-huh.
"Call me in 10 minutes." They'd give me phone numbers and things, or "Go meet me over here." And they'd give me all this intelligence about people doing crimes and everything. And I hop and clean up the neighborhood, and everybody loves me. And
Wow.
so they couldn't pronounce my last name, which is very German. The Mexican folks couldn't, so they would just call me El Bolillo, que habla español. El Bolillo is a type of white bread in Mexico. It's really
Ah,
tasty.
okay.
So that's just what they
Okay.
call me, like
Well,
the white bread guy that speaks Spanish.
that's funny.
So once, and that's what I always tell the students. I'm like, you're going to get discouraged at first. You're going to blame yourself that you don't have an aptitude. for learning the language. We all do that. We're like, maybe it's me, you know, maybe I'm just not good at language. And I wasn't good at language. So sometimes it just to push through with that little extra effort and sometimes try to look at things differently. That's why I'll explain things now from being an English speaker learning Spanish. And I'll say, yes, this is different than English, but this is how it makes sense to me. Maybe I'm thinking of it literally, you know? Maybe I'm
Mhm.
thinking instead of I'm hungry, I have hunger, and I'm thinking of
Mm.
it literally, so I'll remember what it is in Spanish. Whatever it is to kind of help them. Because I'll tell them it's not really a slow progression to get better. It's more like a stair step.
Mhm.
So at first it's a lot of work. You're not seeing the results, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly you can say a few things. Whoop, here's a little stair step, you know?
Yeah.
You go a little further in conversations, whoop, you plateau a little. A lot of people will quit then. They're like, oh, I've peaked. No, you know,
Mm. Mhm.
you push a little harder. And it just stair step your way up. It's not a steady progression. And once people understand that, I think they do a lot better. You know, they don't get
Mhm.
as discouraged. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
wrong. That's what worked
No,
for
I think
me.
no, you are completely right. I think progress is not linear with language learning and with most things. It's not linear. And in the beginning, as you said, it's very important to go over that fear, that doubt that comes anytime you face a new challenge. You don't realize how difficult it is until you are on it or in it, right? So it's important to push through that initial, um, let's say, yeah, resistance or friction, and the other
It
side
is,
is worth it. Mm.
and it really paid off. Later in my career, I was the highest ranking person that could speak Spanish, even though it wasn't my first language. And I would actually teach classes to Spanish speakers that we hired because they're heritage
Mm.
speakers, their parents spoke Spanish. And to teach them terminology, legal terminology and police terminology, so they would be able to testify correctly in court and the lawyers wouldn't, you know, try to
Uh-huh.
disprove that they could understand their
Okay.
client.
Wow.
At that time, I was
Wow.
also doing public speaking for the Mexican consulate out of Orlando. They would have
Wow.
events. I would do question answer for migrants.
Wow.
I
Okay.
did
So lots
undercover
of
operations in
opportunities.
Spanish. Yeah, so
So you
it's
mentioned many
probably
good feedback cycles. All of the people that are so kind to you, correcting you, as opposed to your high school teacher, then you realize that normal
yes.
people will be so kind if you make the effort to speak the language. Spanish speakers are very happy that an American is learning Spanish, so they will always be very kind to you most of the time. And some of my students are afraid. They say, "Oh, if I make something that's not correct, they will laugh at me, or they will be." Offended somehow, and that's not the case. That's
No,
never the
no, that's
case.
not the
No,
case.
no,
No,
no.
people are so nice and wonderful, you know. And
Mhm.
now when I speak Spanish, sometimes the assumption is I don't. So even when I'm in Latin America, they'll just either ignore me
Right.
or, you know, they'll try to speak English. And then when I speak Spanish, they're like, "Oh, hay que pena."
I
It's
give
like,
it. Yeah, well, so many options. And then also, I think you lived in Mexico, right? For as you said, you blog about your experience there. So also
mhm,
another good opportunity to put into use in your job and also in your personal life. So lots of context to put into practice while you are learning. And I think students should try to, maybe there's not such a perfect scenario where in their job they have to, or it's so beneficial for them to speak Spanish, or they are living in Mexico. But
right.
in however way they can, just to create an opportunity to put into practice what they are learning, to get that feedback, that positive feedback loop going, of
I
motivation, I think is good.
I think the advantage that's people have now is this, the internet,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, anyone
We're on different
can
sides of the world right
practice.
now and we're talking and
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
incredible.
Exactly. So one thing about your channel, Paul, that I like is that you explain grammar very well, especially for English speakers. You find what is challenging, what is difficult, and you put it in very simple terms. And people, your audience, I think, loves that. It's quite clear. So tell us about the role of grammar, because nowadays in language learning, there is quite a trend of the compensable input kind of thing, where we learn like babies and we just acquire grammar, which might be true, might be not. But what are your thoughts on that, on the grammar role on language learning?
Yeah, I've seen the push away from grammar, people who are resisting it. I'm going to tell you that when I was trying to learn early on my own, and And again, the incentive being that every time I went to work, I'm going to emergency calls and not being able to communicate. Maybe somebody's bleeding, maybe somebody's attacked somebody. So I have to get as good at this language as quickly as possible. And just being around it wasn't doing it. And I'm around it a lot, it's like all day. It's not doing it. So it was when actually I would go to the bookstore and try to look at new Spanish books, flip through them a little bit, see if there was some reason, should I buy this one? And then I found one that was just grammar. And so I start looking, and it was like the blueprint for the language. It was, and I like to tell people, it's easier to learn Spanish if you learn patterns. As a baby, we're doing that, through our whatever's going on in here. But as adults, we have to be a little bit more conscious about it,
More
So I
explicit,
can teach you, I could teach you a pattern. It's like if it was math, 2, 4, 6, 8, the next one, right? I teach you a pattern in Spanish, and I can repeat it, but it's not just a phrase. I can drop in different words. I can, put it in different parts of the sentence. And I can create a grammatically correct sentence or phrase that I've never seen or heard in my whole life. I've never heard it in that way. So once I got into the grammar, I'm like, this is the easiest way. And I'm not saying it's the only way. I think it's a combination. But this gives you such a head start. A lot of people like the way I teach because, and right away they'll say, stop using so many grammatical terms. I tell them not to be scared, just so they can look it up, right? But I said, really what I'm doing is I'm teaching you patterns. And somebody's already identified the patterns. That's what grammar is. And they put it in a book,
And as
And
an
so you
adult,
don't
you
have
have
to
the
try to,
ability to process the patterns, which is important that people maybe don't think about enough, is that babies don't have that
yeah,
skill, but you do have it as an adult because you did it already with your language, with your mother tongue. So you have that
exactly.
pattern recognition. Let's use it. All right. Let's put it to
And so
use.
that's what I remember many years ago when I was first learning Spanish, and I went to Colombia and ended up meeting a Supreme Court justice from Colombia, very intimidated by this man, and we're speaking Spanish. He didn't speak English. And every now and then I wouldn't know a word for something, he'd say, and he goes, you speak grammatically correct Spanish consistently. And he goes, I find that very, very interesting. He goes, how were you able to develop an ear for Spanish so quickly? I said, I don't have any ear for a Spanish.
There's
I
no
said,
ear.
nothing sounds right or wrong, nothing. I
You know
said,
patterns.
but
Yeah.
I know patterns, and I'm changing some, they're little patterns, and I put them together, and I'm using reasoning to believe that this will be a sentence that's correct in Spanish based on the pattern.
Very good. You mentioned a book.
And
I think I know the book you're talking about, but maybe for the audience, you can share what the book
do you
is.
know the book I'm talking about?
I think you
Can I show
do.
the
I think I
book?
do. You should show the book. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a new reference grammar of modern Spanish, and this is what are we up to now? The 6th edition, and it has improved a lot.
Yeah.
I had the 2nd years ago, and it changed everything. This is where I learned about the subjunctive, which most people learning Spanish avoid. I actually, at a state college in Florida, I stopped by and talked to one of the Spanish professors. And I said, to graduate, how many, years of Spanish? He goes, it's Spanish 1 and 2 to graduate, not with a Spanish degree, but for a language requirement to graduate. And I said, so do you have one of your textbooks? And he goes, yeah. In fact, can I show that textbook? He gave me one.
Yes.
He gave me a teacher's edition, so it's this one. It's very,
I
very
know
popular
this.
in the
Very,
US.
very popular. Yeah. Many of my students
Very
have used
popular.
this.
So
This
I
is not
said,
terrible.
okay.
That's okay.
I said, no. I said, when are you starting to teach that, And he goes, oh, we don't even teach it in those first 2
They
years.
don't even
We don't
do
even
the
touch on it.
subjunctive in 2 years. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
He goes,
Actually, it's
because
very
it
common.
confuses students, he says.
In Spain, they teach it at the B1 level, which is the 3rd course you will do in a language learning school, right? So if each course takes around 3 to 4 months, then it might take a year for you to get to the subjunctive also in.
Yeah, it's very similar. They can do both of those in the first year, so it's about in the 3rd. Because if we'd had a 3rd, course, he says we'd start to introduce it.
Yeah, exactly. But with that book, yeah, the New Reference Grammar of Modern Spanish is a great book. It's very detailed. I'm not sure if it's for everyone. because some
Right.
people might be
It's very
intimidated by the
detailed.
terminology, but it's very detailed. It's very, and what makes it special is that it focuses on the English speaker perspective, right?
Hmm.
And that's quite unique in a book. Mm. So that's fantastic. So you believe, Paul, pattern recognition, grammar, something important, something to pay attention to, right?
And then the follow-up. Then the follow-up. You have to listen to native speakers. You have to communicate with them. And so I had that advantage at work. I was able to go and read these things and then go practice my patterns. So it's not just one of those things works.
No,
I think grammar gives them a huge head start on the language. Huge.
yeah, exactly. But if you only do grammar, I have many students that get to me after 6 months of just drilling grammar, and then they cannot use it, right? So it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
either
It
just
has to
one
have
or
a
the other. It's
balance.
a balance between the two. Okay. Any other resources or tips you can share about learning a language before we move on to speaking more about your teaching? As a learner, what other resources or maybe some common bad advice that you hear, that what things to avoid too, which is more important
The common bad
to
advice.
avoid,
Well, the
yeah,
common bad
avoid
advice was
pitfalls.
that if you're just there, you're just going to absorb the language like a baby does.
Exactly.
You know,
Yes.
I lived in Mexico for years. I'm in the US now because we had to come back and take care of a parent. But knew a lot of foreigners who moved to Mexico and didn't make an effort to speak Spanish. And some of them have been there 15 years and still can't speak Spanish. And they're in a Spanish
Mhm.
speaking country. You're just not going to wake up one day and go, I learned the language,
Mm. No, no, that doesn't happen. That
You have to
doesn't
make the
happen.
effort.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. So one thing is that to make the effort is when to start speaking. It's another thing, another debate. Some people believe that well, until they are not ready, or if they make too many mistakes, these mistakes can be fossilized, that is called, that you will
Uh,
stay with these mistakes, or if you don't have proper pronunciation. And then there's the emotional side, that speaking to someone, even if today is easier than ever with uh, online tutors and exchanges and everything, emotionally can be difficult, right? And some people prefer to wait to be ready. What do you think about that? When should we start speaking? When you start learning a new language, you start learning Spanish.
I, I think as soon as you can make a sentence, you should try to practice your sentence. You know,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's going to have an accent. I mean, you learn a language, you're going to have an accent. But it's just to get out there. And one of the advice that I give people, and one of the things that paralyzes people, is they're like, okay, I'm nervous. I want to say something. Now I'm going to think of the entire sentence in my head. Okay, I think I have my sentence. And now the conversation it's gone. Like your opportunity to say that sentence is gone.
Yeah.
So I tell people, it's like, you don't think in your own language that way, you know? So I do the train analogy. Get your engine going. Let people know you want to talk. Throw something out there. Bueno, something, just so they know
Whatever it
something's coming.
is. Whatever.
And you can slow your speech down and you can think about it. The Colombian Supreme Court, on the highest court, spoke very slowly and very methodically. And I thought he was only doing it for my benefit, you know, but then that's just how he speaks. He's very
Mm-hmm.
careful with his words. So you don't have to talk too fast. You can take your time. You can pause. That's what I tell them.
Mm-hmm.
You can be like, bueno, en cuanto a lo que me dijiste ayer, creo. You don't have to be like, let me put all this in my head. Go.
Yeah, of course. You can take your time. You can choose, some fillers and some ways to help you. In Spanish, we call this muletillas. Yeah? So
Yes,
muletillas.
yes.
Yeah. So that's a good
I was
good
actually going to do a
advice.
video and teach people that word and talk about them. But
Oh,
I
well.
I saw so many videos on YouTube and they talk about how not to use them, how to get away from them. Don't use them.
Well, it's true because any communication expert will tell you to avoid the muletillas, right? They are ineffective in terms of communication because they don't mean much. But for language learners to buy some time,
Oh
it
yeah.
might be a good thing. It might be a good thing, right? So fantastic, Paul. So we have some advice regarding how to learn a language, but I'm interested in knowing more about what makes you such an effective teacher, because I think your channel has, well, many 120,000 subscribers, but that's not what's impressive. It's the level of engagement you get, the comments, the likes. This, the people really connect with the way you teach Spanish. So first, what made you start teaching online on a YouTube channel? And second, what do you think makes you such an effective teacher? You already said that you look for the patterns and you understand them for an English speaker's perspective, but what makes you special, basically? Give me the secret, please.
I don't, I don't, I don't know about special. Actually, this channel, I started it, I had it for a long time. It just, I didn't do much with it, and it only just recently became more popular. When I first moved to Mexico, many of my neighbors who were from the US and Canada, they were like, Paul, can you teach us Spanish? And I said, no. They said, why not? I said, because I want to go to the beach, and I want to drink margaritas and explore Mexico. And that's what I'm here for, not to sit and teach Spanish all day. I said, but I'll start to do videos, and I'll put them up. So I did animated videos at first with an animated me, and I taught. And they watched that. And some people watched those when they read my blog and things. And then years later, I started kind of adding some, but I couldn't afford the subscription anymore, for the animation.
To the animation,
So
so right.
I kind of just switched to me. And maybe it was a difference seeing a real person because I was
That's a big
explaining the
difference.
concepts in the
Yeah,
same way.
no, but it's a big difference. The people connect with people, right? So,
But I've always, and it's really my only real, like, if you say your only real ability, always been one of my main abilities is the ability to take complex topics and simplify them to explain to people. Like in the US, when I was in law enforcement, I used to teach legal issues and complex search and seizure, and I would teach these things, and you're dealing with all of these judicial precedents and everything, and I would simplify it into yes, no things, for police. You have this certain charge, the person runs in their house, you're chasing them, can you enter? Yes, no, yes, no. So they knew the answers all the time. So I'm explaining this complex area of case law and reducing it into simple forms. I did the same thing when I moved to Mexico and I started teaching people about living in Mexico. I taught them about immigration law. I would read the laws and then because I like legal, and I would talk about immigration laws and import laws and, everything, but I would simplify it. So people are like, I just like your simple way, of explaining things. So it's basically just how I think I look at things in general. I kind of break it down for myself into simple terms so I can remember it, and I just repeat that to somebody else. And that resonates with some people. They like it. So
Yeah, I think you're right. Just the ability to simplify complex topics, and then your unique experience or quite rare experience of mastering Spanish as an English speaker and doing it so well is different than people hearing from a native speaker. I think they relate to you more because you went through what they want to go through. So I think that's another thing. Yeah. So
yeah, that does help.
what are the two, three, four things that trip most English speakers? And maybe I'm sure you have videos about them, so we can direct them then to your channel. But what would you say, three, four things that are really, really challenges for those learning Spanish?
I think because, anytime we're learning, and you speak, so many languages, so I don't know if you had to go through
Oh,
any of that. You speak everything so well.
yeah.
But when you're learning another language, we naturally assume that it's going to fit our paradigm of what we understand language. So we like the sentence structure to match. So all of a sudden, when it doesn't in Spanish, that starts to throw people off. And then the big stumbling blocks that really make people want to quit are like direct and indirect object pronouns, the say pops in there for lay, things like that. As soon as people say that, a lot of times they're like, I don't want to do it. Like this now just got too complicated. I thought I could learn Spanish. And so I did a video about that. And it is a complex area. I try to simplify it as much, but there is a lot to it. And a lot of people are like, I like the way that you explained it. You kind of simplified it, which I try to do as much as possible. So that's a big one. That one makes people want to quit. The subjunctive makes people want to quit, you know.
And por impara
And when I
instead of
tell
estar.
Yeah, and when I tell people, I said, the third thing that really frustrates people is, and I'm trying to deal with it because I have an audience that wants to learn a lot of different, variations of the language. I have about 13%, like we talked about, who are more focused on European Spanish, which I'm very Latin American Spanish,
Mhm.
is to be like, okay, I'm going to show you how sentences are made. And now I'm going to do a lot of howevers and like asterisks. It's kind of like that gets frustrating to people because they'll learn something and go to someone who speaks Spanish and they'll say it and they'll be like, no, 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 no. I like this word, or I like it to phrase it like this. And suddenly they're like,
Mm.
I didn't learn anything.
Yeah,
So
the
now the
regional
challenge with the
variation is
videos,
huge. Yeah.
yeah, is to say, okay, this is, and I give advice for that. Okay, this is, and especially if it's something I'm aware with the differences, you know, in European and Latin America, I'll point that out for those students. And then I'll say, among Latin America, when you get
Wow.
down to the Southern Cone,
Wow.
that's going to
Well,
change. You may
there
hear this.
yeah, in Spain also it changes, right? It's not the
Yeah,
same
even within
the way
Spain, you have
people.
a lot
Yeah,
of
within
variations.
Spain there's a lot of variations also. Yeah. So
So,
yeah.
so that's such a frustrating thing for people, and they'll be like, "Well, can't you teach me neutral Spanish?" And I said,
Yeah.
"What would neutral?" I said, "Okay, what would our word for the trunk of a car be? Because there's much of those. What would straw be? What word would we choose? You know,
Yeah,
even if we all
that's right.
agreed on everything else."
Yeah.
So I tell them, so I tell them, this is how I would play it safe. This is the safest construction to use. You know, you're going to sound correct to the majority of Spanish speakers. And if you're focusing on a certain area, then listen how they respond to you because people are very nice, you know, generally.
They will tell
And
you.
then pay attention to that and, you know, and tweak your Spanish to fit whatever the local country is or region or wherever you're at.
Mm-hmm.
What term do they use for that, you know? Like when we first moved to Mexico, my wife is originally from Colombia, but grew up in the US. She moved when she was 10. And so when we moved to Mexico, I speak a very Mexican Spanish. And so even at government buildings, reading some of the signs, she would go, what do they mean by that? What do they mean by that word? And I said, are you asking me
Yeah,
to
for
translate?
myself also. Some of my students tell me a word, and my initial response is correct. No, that's not right. But then I look it up just in case in the dictionary, and in the dictionary you can see the origin of the word. And sometimes there is a word that is said in a certain way in a certain country that I wasn't aware of. And I said, oh no.
Oh
Okay,
yeah, I've
so
had that happen.
I learn also new ways of saying things lots of the time, right? And that's a beautiful thing. That's
So
a challenging thing, but it's also quite nice, right? The
it is.
variety
So I
that you
try to
get
tell
with
people to
Spanish.
choose a country. I said, if you choose
In
a
the
country, and
beginning,
if you can't choose
yes.
a
In the
country,
beginning.
choose a hemisphere. Try to narrow it
Yeah,
down to a hemisphere, right?
yeah, that's right. That's
I've
right.
learned so
Yeah, I think in
much
the
actually
beginning.
from the YouTube channel. I've learned so much about more Spain Spanish and European Spanish
Yeah, because
because
people will tell you in the
if I,
comments, right?
well, the comments, yeah, you
Right. It
learn so
happens to me
much.
too. Yeah. People are very quick to say, no, that's how you say it in this place. So
Yeah, they are
yeah,
quick.
absolutely,
They're helpful.
absolutely.
I like that they're helpful.
Of course, it's nice. It's very nice. It's always good to learn, right? So that's fantastic, Paul. Great. So, any last advice that you would share with people that are learning anything that, especially for beginners who are starting out, which I think is the most challenging phase? You feel a bit overwhelmed. There are so many resources out there, so many approaches, and also something I'm a bit annoyed by is the false expectations that are thrown out there with learning 3 months and 10 minutes a day, this kind of thing. So for that beginner just starting out with saying, okay, let's do this with so many options, so many things, what would you tell them?
With the beginner, I would tell them if you can go to a course for beginners and videos and build a language. If they start with a beginner's course, just because somebody's teaching it in a certain order to give you basics, I would
Mm-hmm.
recommend doing that and then kind of adding little other parts.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the big thing. Also, keep reasonable expectations. You're not going to be
Very
fluent in
important.
90 days or probably in a year. And
Mm-hmm.
when you start to get discouraged that you're not where you want to be, then take the time to look back and see how far you've come. Look how much you've learned. Look how much you couldn't say a week ago. Eh, I found myself getting discouraged over the years, you know. And so what I would always do is, okay, instead of my goal to be, you know, super fluent, and which I reached, but that looks so far away, right? When you're struggling with this verb conjugation.
Yeah.
So then my goal just became, I just want to be better at Spanish, a little better today than I was yesterday. That's my goal, just a little better today. You know, and after time goes by, you look back and you've come a long way and you've met your goals, you know?
Yeah, focus on small gains. Like today, I learn a new word, or today I understand 10% more of this podcast, or today I was able just to have a 5-minute conversation with someone, or now I'm able to read a real book instead of just a book for children. Or so
Yeah,
these small victories are not so small, but just try to appreciate every step of the way. You need to enjoy the
exactly.
journey, right? Because it's a long journey, so you better enjoy it.
You better enjoy it. See, that's why you're such a good instructor. You understand all those, you know, that journey a part of it and everything else. So
Well, because unfortunately, it will be easier to tell people that they can learn a language in 10 minutes a day and playing some games on the app. That will be easier, but with my experience, that only leads to frustration. So I prefer to be realistic.
yeah. Yeah, that app, yeah, those apps sell a lot, but you know, I get people and they're
Yeah,
like, I've been
exactly.
on it four years. I haven't missed a day and I can't say
Oh my
anything.
goodness, I got students with a 3,000 million day streak on Duolingo.
It's
And then,
insane.
so, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? And then, what? So,
Exactly.
so, yeah, it's tricky, it's tricky. So thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your experience both as a learner and as a teacher. And please, for people watching, if they have struggled, if they are struggling with se, lo, or la, or the pronouns, or the subjunctive, you have Paul on your side with his videos, simplifying things for you. And watch the videos because they are amazing. And also, one thing that you do very well is to provide lots of examples. I think that's amazing in your videos. Lots of examples for people to see what you're explaining. So yeah, anyone that's wants to learn more Spanish grammar and concepts, English speakers, go to watch Paul, right?
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me here.
No problem. Thank you, Paul. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.
I hope you found this conversation valuable. And if you're taking your first steps with the language, you can download my free beginner kit, which are the best resources to get started with Spanish on the right foot, including what to read, what to watch, some grammar resources, and many other tools. You will find the link in the description alongside the link to Paul's favorite grammar book. Thank you so much for your attention. Nos vemos en clase.